Hi, I'm AJ Palmgren, and I am obsessed about Knight Rider. In September of 1982, I was 10 years old, and like most boys my age, Dukes of Hazzard was my favorite TV show. Well, that month I remember seeing a commercial about a black car with this really strange red light going back and forth on the front. And the announcer was next to a car I was familiar with, the Dukes of Hazzard, the General Lee, or one that looked like it. And the announcer says that this black car does a lot more than go fast and jump puddles. Well, I was skeptical because I really liked the Dukes of Hazzard. I thought that was cool. I mean, what kid doesn't? The car just, does all kinds of spin outs and jumps over ravines and stuff like that. Well, on Sunday, September 26th, 1982, I watched the pilot of Knight Rider, and that show captivated my imagination like nothing ever had before, or hardly anything has since. I mean, that car could jump over all kinds of stuff on its own. It didn't need a little ramp of dirt like, the General Lee. It could talk, it could drive itself, it could crash through walls without getting a scratch. It could shoot people out of the seat when it/he didn't want them there. It could come to the rescue on its own. This was a cool car. It was awesome. And thus began my obsession. Of course, I had to see every episode thereafter. And so I made sure that I was always available every Friday night then on NBC to make sure I had the time at the TV and not to be disturbed when that show was on. And I started to get the TV guide that my parents had and made sure I read it to make sure that the episode was going to be on and see what the episode was going to be about. As a kid, I never cared about anything like that before, so this was like a whole new thing. Now, my parents didn't have a VCR in that time period, at least not for the first 2 seasons of Knight Rider. And of course, I really wanted to record this, so I started to bug my parents about that. Well, they didn't get me a VCR, but that Christmas they did get me a 35mm camera, and so I started thinking, well, I was fascinated with the dashboard of this car. This dashboard was awesome. It was unlike anything I'd seen. All kinds of cool lights and words that I didn't understand, and it was massive and mysterious, and you only saw sections of it at a time for the most part. So I started to have my camera ready when I would watch the episodes, and when Kit's dashboard would come up on the screen, just for a second or two, I'd quick snap a picture. And most of them turned out really well. And so I'd have to wait a week, have those developed, and I started to put them in a scrapbook. And after a while, I'd collected enough scenes of the dash that I was able to understand how it was all laid out. And that later that year, I had was so fascinated with this dash that I said, I'm going to build one. So I built one out of cardboard and made it look pretty close, basically from the layout that I could see in the pictures. And I actually have a picture of that we're sending you. So that's a cool thing to see. And I also kept a scrapbook of every single episode that I would see on television. I cut out the TV guide description of the episode, and I cut out the pictures of the TV guide advertisement for that particular episode for Knight Rider, and made a book and kept track of the episodes, which episode played on what day, and not only the first run but also the rerun. And then I even started to record the episodes. Didn't have a VCR, so I would record them on audio tape, and I even have one here with me. Record one. This is one of the original tapes that I used 29 years ago to record an episode, and I took the TV Guide article and just put it right on top there, so you could actually see the description of that. Very tape, 29 years ago. And I was really, really into this show. And so after the third season, somewhere in the middle of the third season, my parents actually got a VCR, and of course, I made sure that I recorded every single episode of Knight Rider, and did a lot of freeze frame and studied the dash and all kinds of fun things like that. And in the third season, the whole dash changed. It was a whole new dash to study and build. So, of course, I did that. And to this day, I still have every single one of those video cassettes from the 3rd and 4th season that I recorded back then. And this is my second recording of this. So the first one was like 40 minutes, and I didn't even get through everything. So I'm going to try to go a little faster this time. After the 4th season was over and the show was canceled, I had all this cool stuff. And by that time I was 14, and I thought, well, I'm a little bit old for this. This is cool, but you know, it's not cool for somebody as old as me to really be into this. So, the show was over. I put these things that I had collected from the TV guides in this book, and even some toys that I had actually bought or talked my parents into buying for me. Just a few things, and put them all in a box. And that box sat in the attic, and I think it moved with me to a couple of different locations until one day in 1998. This is years later. I can't say I've forgotten about Knight Rider, but I wasn't focused on it for quite some time. When I'd see something about it, like on a syndication rerun or something, it would get my attention, and I have different stories about that. But one night in 1998, a friend of mine, we're up late one night, and we were talking about a little known late night, only shown on cable show called Team Knight Rider. You might have to look that up because very few people have even heard of it, and you might not have heard of it either. Team Knight Rider aired in a few episodes in 1998 on a late night obscure cable network that I can't even remember. But we were talking about that. And so in the middle of that conversation, I remembered this box that I had. And so I went up in the attic of the house I was living in at the time, and I pulled it down. And I opened that box up. And I looked through these things that I hadn't seen since I was 14. I suppose, what was this, 10 years ago now? 14 years, yeah, I was about 20, 27, 28, I think. I'd have to do the math. But anyway, we'll move on, because I have a short time to get all this in. I went through this box, and I saw the book that I had put together as a kid, and these things that I had saved, and the notes that I had made, and all of the recordings that I had made of the show, and they were all in there. And my first thought was, man, I was really obsessed with this show. And my second thought was, this is really cool. I now remember exactly why I thought this show was so awesome. And from that moment, it's like I picked up where I left off. The next day, it was now 1998, so we had access to the internet. In its infancy, of course, but the internet was there. So the next day I went to work, and I did a search on Knight Rider. Google wasn't quite popular yet, so I don't remember what search engine I used. But I did a search on Knight Rider, and I was amazed at the kind of things that popped up. That day, I discovered eBay. And all of these toys that I couldn't get my parents to buy me back in the day, or that I was too embarrassed because the toy was really for a kid a little bit younger than I was and didn't get. Now I could find a lot of these things on eBay. So I was an adult, I had a career in IT. So I started buying all kinds of stuff. All the toys that I could find. Some original in the package that I thought were really cool as a kid. And I really started to expand this collection. So I was back into it. And that same year, I found that there was, I read a web page where somebody was advertising a car show for replicas of Kit, the Knight Rider car. And I thought, well, I have to go to that. So in August of 1998, I find myself at my first Knight Registries car show. And actually, I had looked at the schedule ahead of time before I went and thought, well, there's some holes in the schedule. I think I can fill them. So I brought a collection of things that I had, both from when I was a kid, as well as some things I bought recently on eBay, about the size of this, maybe twice that size, and had spread it all out over the hotel room, and I had actually made a little flyer, and I put it on the hotel. I put it on the hotel lobby, and so when people would come in for the car show, they'd see that. And so, as it turned out, I had this massive Knight Rider episode showing party in my hotel room with all kinds of toys and and notes that I had made from the original. And I started to share this stuff for the first time with somebody else that actually thought it was interesting. And so the guy that had organized the show came a little bit later, and he showed up and said, "Wow, you must be AJ." I said, "Yeah." He said, I'm Damien." No. Was that his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, we'll get there. I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. It is Damien. He said, "I'm Damien." And he said, "You're going to be our new Knight Rider archivist." I thought, well, wow, that's pretty cool. I just met you, and now you just added me to your crew. Okay, I guess I made a strong first impression. But that was really fun. It was a really fun moment. I later kind of adapted that title and have called myself a Knight Rider historian. It's a self-made title, but I think it actually fits fairly well. So that just began a whole nother chapter of my obsession over Knight Rider in my adult life that year. And so I ended up going to just about every Knight Rider event across the country. In 2004, I started going to Knight Rider events in Europe and in other countries. In 2001, on one of these Knight Rider web boards, I actually saw a guy that wanted to write a book about Knight Rider, and so I connected with him. And he's somebody I'm very close friends with today by the name of Joe Huth. And he and I have done all kinds of Knight Rider things together. This was actually our first book, Knight Rider Legacy. And Joe and I and a guy that we can't find anymore by the name of Richie we did all kinds of research on the show. And this now for the first time, between the three of us, we started to find people and connect with people that actually worked in the show. And we had interviews with the creator of Knight Rider, Glenn Larson. We had interviews with Patricia McPherson, the mechanic on the show for the first, third, and fourth seasons. We had episodes with Robert Foster, who was an executive producer for the majority of the show after Glenn Larson had left the show and put it in his capable hands. And one of the exciting moments about that is when we were interviewing Glenn over the phone, and he told us, I told him about my fascination with the car and thanked him for writing a show that captivated my imagination as a kid, such that it did. And he told us for the first time, we never heard who he hired to design the car. His name is Michael Chaffee. Well, as a result of that interview, we were able to find Michael Chaffee. And so now, at the time of writing this book now, 11 years ago, I was able to actually, Joe and I were able to interview Michael Chaffee over email, and I had a phone conversation with him, and I was able to thank him myself for designing such an amazing dashboard that captivated my imagination as a kid, and all the things he designed with the car. And so we had a fantastic interview with him. I was able to send him the picture of the cardboard dash that I made, and I think Joe made one too as well, and we sent those to him so that he could see how his work impacted us. And actually, as a result of that, he started to come to some of our Knight Rider events. We invited him to some of our Knight Rider replica events, and he was just absolutely amazed that so many people had taken his work so seriously that they would actually build copies of his work and make their own changes to it and take pride and ownership and things like that. So indirectly, I suppose, as a result of Joe's and I's work, we've now gotten a number of people together who worked on the show. We got Michael Chaffee. He just decided to join in this fan base, and so now he's a regular attender at a couple of these shows a year. And there's over the years, Joe and I have just continued to do a tremendous amount of things to learn about the filming of Knight Rider and filming locations and the stories that the people who worked in Knight Rider, both on camera and off, have to share about the show. And so even though this book was published 11 years ago, our work still continues just for the fun of it. And so we have spoken, between the two of us, we've spoken with well over half, maybe even 2/3 of all of the people that worked on Knight Rider over those 4 years. Here's a cast photo that somebody had taken and given to us. And so I actually spent time in the last couple of years just sitting down with some of the people who were in the picture and asking who some of these other people are that I don't recognize. And a lot of them I knew, and that's absolutely fascinating. So I just have collected all kinds of stories about the most fascinating people to talk to for me is in addition to Michael Chaffee, the designer of the car, but also the stuntman. Jack Gill is one of the key stuntmen for this show, and he loves to talk about his work because I don't think they were really able to talk about it back in the day. It was, I suppose, frowned upon. But he tells us all kinds of stories about the modifications that they did to the cars to get them to do certain things, and why those things were the case, why they did those modifications, and you know, stories of things that would happen on the set, stories of things that would happen on camera, things that would not go right. I find those things absolutely fascinating. And so Joe and I and another gentleman are actually working on yet another book, just because this stuff is so much fun. You know, Joe and I have discovered that we've been able to determine that we're both very fascinated with all aspects of the show, but in particular now, the original cars that were used in the show. Not necessarily replicas, although those are absolutely fascinating. We have so many friends that have built such nice replica cars, but the cars that were actually used on camera for that original series, Joe and I have been able to determine that, that 5 of the original cars have survived. Maybe more, we just haven't found them yet, but we've confirmed that 5 have. And Joe and I, mostly Joe because he's the owner, but Joe and I are now able to own 2 of them. And I suppose I can call myself a caretaker, and Joe can call himself an owner. So 2 of the 5 are in our collection, which I think is a pretty darn cool thing. And Joe and I have made it a point to spend lots of time learning all about the remaining 3 and find any more. So I've been known to go to places as far away as Switzerland to see a car that was supposedly an original. Somebody put on eBay, an auction house put on eBay an original used Knight Rider car, and it just worked out well that I could get a cheap ticket to Switzerland, and within days there I am in a strange country I've never been to before, in a strange auction house, and I'm looking over this car and come to find out that well, it wasn't quite used on camera for Knight Rider, but it seemed to be built for David Hasselhoff's rock concert tour in Europe, which was very popular in the 80s, 90s, and even today. But this is a car that appeared to be built for that. So I've traveled the world, certainly here in the United States and other places, looking for original cars and determining whether they are or are not. And it's just a fascinating hobby of mine. And Joe is always a very important part of that, because I might have a question about something, and of course I'm in another country, might not have internet access, and he has this massive organization of thousands and thousands of pictures of scenes used on the show, screenshots and behind the scenes pictures, and all kinds of things like that. And we just do all kinds of fascinating work, at least for us, fascinating, of you know, learning what was and wasn't used in the show. So we have all kinds of pictures to share with you, the pictures where the stuntmen tell us, you know, these are just notes that I made in the last few months when I've met with some of the guys who are actually in the pictures. They would tell us little things about the stuff that they put on the car, and you know, they'd give us names. People are in the pictures that we might not recognize, and someday we might contact, and they might want to talk to us just to chat. And you know, it's getting to the point where you know, when Joe and I put together an event, or were part of an event, we invite enough people that worked on the show, and in some of the cases, these people haven't seen each other in 10, 20, maybe even 30 years. So we're kind of directly or indirectly responsible for some reunions of the cast, you know, because we've made contact with so many of them. In many cases, you know, made close friends with them. One in particular, Don Peake, didn't write the music for Knight Rider. Stu Phillips and Glenn Larson wrote the theme. Stu Phillips did some fantastic music for the first 12 episodes, but episode 13 through 84, Don Peake wrote all the music for. And he and I have become very close friends. As a matter of fact, I've even done some singing in his studio, in his recording studio. So it seems like my relationship with some of these people has gone beyond Knight Rider, and it's really been a fascinating journey for me. So, and you know, it's just really fun to hear the people that worked on pieces of the original cars, and the stories that they have with the people that they worked with, and on, and stuff like this is absolutely fascinating. And you know, Joe and I do a fantastic amount of work on this just for our own fun. He keeps these pictures very organized, and every once in a while, if I'm able to go to a place and he isn't, he'll find some pictures that are relevant to something I just learned and send them to me, and I might print them, and we'll have a conversation with that person about that. You know, like just this past year, I met Bob Brawler, who actually directed a couple of episodes, and I'd never met him before. He just happened to show up unexpected at a Knight Rider show, one of the 30th anniversary Knight Rider shows, because it is the 30th anniversary of Knight Rider this year. So I'm glad you guys are doing this. But I was able to, just real quick, Joe sent me some pictures of him actually doing a cameo in an episode. Of course, between the two of us, we figured out that, well, he was, so we should ask him some questions about that. So really it's become quite a bit of a team effort. And I just really, really enjoy learning all kinds of things about Knight Rider. So I'm actually, at the moment, traveling on business. I am 1,600 miles away from home right now. The majority of my collection and Joe and I shared collection, including one of the cars, is actually in Iowa right now. And but it just so happens that because on business, I also plan to come to a Knight Rider show. As scheduled as a part of that, I did bring some things. So this is actually maybe 1/20th of my collection, things that I've had over the years. For example, this piece here, it's not from an original car. I acquired it before I ever found or saw in person any original pieces from a car, but this has traveled the world with me, and I've had every person that ever worked on Knight Rider sign that. And as you can see, it's quite extensive, and even had to add some signatures on the back. So things like this travel with me everywhere, and you know, just all kinds of fun things. You know, for example, the book that Joe and I worked on, it's actually been translated into Japanese, and here's a copy of that Japanese version right here. And a friend of ours, actually, I think you interviewed him. His name is Nick Nugent. He's done his own work with Knight Rider, and he made a very nice book. But we use this as a reference, and Nick used a portion of material from our original book with permission, and we have regular meetings with him on a regular basis, and all kinds of fun things like that. So when we get together when we have car shows or events where the cars are involved, or just get-togethers or something, and the people that worked on the cast are always invited. I always try to make a nice little packet for them. Joe and I have tried to make a nice little packet for them together. Something new that we haven't shared with them before. You know, maybe pictures of them on a set that we saw, and talk with them about it. That's always really a very fascinating thing. So it's a fantastic hobby to have. A little bit of an expensive one, but a fantastic one to have. So that's a little bit about my obsession with Knight Rider, and I'm so glad you're interested.